Hi, and welcome to Straight Talk About God video. This is segment number 15, and on the lost tribes. And how does the Bible relate to history? And how can the Bible be anything but legend and myth and mistranslation and all that? Well, the answer isn't in the Bible. It's in history itself, right? And that's what we've been doing over the last 14 segments. Been digging out the historical facts that appear to verify and fulfill biblical writings. Some writings 2,000 years old. You know, how could they know that? And yet there the facts are right in history. And we're going to get on with that this week with the tribe of Dan, but just so that we haven't gotten away from the larger picture. I mean, there's over 20 segments to this series, and what I think we should do is do a little quick review, okay, of what we've got so far. So here's the whole gestalt in one long sentence, okay, of the whole Lost Tribes series, not just so we've gone so far, the whole thing. Okay, here's the whole thing. The northern kingdom of the Hebrew nation of 12 tribes, called the house or the kingdom of Israel, was conquered by the Assyrians and relocated south of the Black and the Caspian Seas, the Caucasus Mountains, from which place they migrated west and north and east, all the way to become the nations of Europe, Northwest Europe, including England, Scotland, Ireland, and eventually the United States. That's the whole Lost Tribes study. That will take you, I don't know, a couple of 100 hours to fill out in detail. See, details. See, the devil isn't what's in the details. The devil's in the details. Well, that means usually that, oh yeah, the hard part, that's the easy part, but the hard part is in the details. Oh, the devil isn't in the details. God is in the details. You research any subject you want. I don't care what subject it is. You get down to the very bottom of the barrel, you find God. You don't find the devil. You find the devil on the way in the middle sections. He's trying to obscure all those details. See? And the reason why we say it's so hard, because the details are the truth of God. I mean, who wants the truth of God? You know, that's too hard. Okay? God is in the details. Okay, so first of all, we studied the prophecies and the promises that show what's going to happen to those groups of people and where they're likely to wind up and what they look like in history. And the process is, the promises rather, were given to various men by the right of primogeniture, okay? Firstborn gets everything, gets the birthright and all that stuff. But Jacob, in Genesis 49, he split the birthright. And that's a whole crossroads of Scripture. And if you don't recognize that, later on in all the prophecies, you won't know what's being talked about, who's being talked about, any of that. He splits the birthright, and it complicates the whole picture, see? Because he gave the scepter, the right to rule a family, and the law-keeping to Judah, his fourth-born son, by Leah. That's all he got. Nobody else got anything except Joseph. Joseph got everything. He got the whole birthright. You see, because in Genesis 48, Jacob adopted both of Joseph's sons, and he preeminized, if you want to make up a word, Joseph's second-born son, EPHRAIM. Ephraim, actually. Well, Ephraim got the whole birthright, okay? And that causes a separation, right? And also a dilemma for later on, because, I tell you that? Yeah, because 54 years later, when Joseph dies, okay, rules for 80 years, but 54 years after he adopts, see, in Genesis 40, I didn't finish that, he adopted the two kids, put Ephraim first, and it says right there in the next verse, it says, as Reuben and Simeon. They are mine as Reuben and Simeon are the first and second born. Jacob not only adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, he put them first and second in the family. So, firstborn now is considered Ephraim, and he gets the birthright. Okay? But when he dies, when Joseph dies after reigning 80 years, well, there's still 300 years left before the Exodus. 300 years. Who's going to rule? The Pharaoh? That isn't what happens. That isn't what happens, because in the first chapter of Exodus, you find that the Pharaoh finally, a Pharaoh comes from up on southern Egypt, up on the plateau, where he's been out sunning himself on the deck by the pool while Joseph ran the whole country. Well, 250 years later, he doesn't know anything about Joseph. And it says right there, a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph came down and he conquered the Israelites. And until that time, they ruled. They ran the whole country. But they ran it so well that the Pharaoh didn't mind. You know, all the pharaohs that knew Joseph, and then down the line, until they forgot all about him, everything was fine. I mean, they didn't have to do anything. The Israelites were running the whole thing. But which Israelites ruled the family down in Egypt and ruled all of Egypt after Joseph dies? Well, we have to go to Jacob, of course. And Jacob says, Judah gets to be king. Judah gets to be king. Well, by the time Joseph dies, Judah's already dead. Okay? Well, who takes over from Judah then? His firstborn, right, a primogenitor. Who's the firstborn? Remember, we looked at that in Tamar and Judah in the 38th chapter of Genesis, and she made him go the right way. And she had twins by him. And the firstborn was Zara. Zara. Now, how do we know Zara was firstborn? Because it says in there that the midwife, she knew there were twins. That midwives know that kind of stuff, okay? Knew there were twins. Her main job when the delivery happens is to recognize the firstborn. Find out who the firstborn is and make sure that they know who that is, okay? Well, when the birth happens, Zara, his arm comes out of the womb and just stays there for a second or two, and she says, "Oop, firstborn," and she wraps a red cord around his hand. Well, the hand goes back in, and then his brother is full-born, but Zara is the firstborn because he's got the red cord. Well, then Zara is going to rule I even think that Zara himself was gone. But Zara, or his firstborn, is going to rule, and all of the Zarahites down to the time when the Pharaoh comes down from Upper Egypt and conquers them are ruled by Zara. His brother Pharez is there, and he's a big family, and all the other tribes are there, and they're big families, and they're doing their thing and prospering until there's maybe 3 million of them that come out of the Exodus. And there's way more than that, because there had to be at least hundreds of thousands of them that not only escaped when Pharaoh came down, escaped and got away, but before that, for 250 years, they were migrating different places all around. The tribe of Dan, as we've seen in the last two segments, was all over the North Mediterranean, up all the rivers, establishing trade and settling places and naming all these rivers after themselves and the places after themselves, and Sardinia and all that, and where they went, all the way around Africa. And we'll see today that they went all the way up into India, around the Horn, up into India. I lost my place. Okay, the split. Okay, Zara is ruling, and then we kind of left it there. And we also saw with Ezekiel even outlines that split. That wasn't considered a split. It wasn't considered a split until 920 BC. Oh, they were way after the Exodus, 500 years after the Exodus. There was a full 12-tribe nation of Israel, ruled by David for 40 years, no enemies, from the Euphrates all the way to the Nile. There wasn't a split. But Ezekiel writes after the captivity of Judah, 200 years later than the Assyrian conquering of Israel. They're gone for 200 years. And he's over in Babylon writing his, and he talks about Aholah and Aholabah, the two sisters who bruised their teeth with the Egyptian gods. Well, they weren't split down there, were they? They all lived up in Goshen, and they were doing their stuff and ruling and all that. There was no split. And yet Ezekiel says, yeah, there was a split. At the birthright, boom, Jacob split the birthright. And there's two entities. And there are always going to be enmity between them. All right? Then we went to Hosea and found the prophecy. Hosea prophesied at the time of the house of Israel when they were still in the land. And he said, you guys, you're doing it so bad. You're worshiping idols, doing all that stuff. Well, we got out of Hosea, we got four characteristics about the house of Israel. Number one, he says that they would be scattered. They were. Assyria came, took them away, scattered them around everywhere. They call it in Jewish history the dispersion. Not the diaspora, but the dispersion. Okay? Went away. He says you'll be scattered. He says you won't have God's mercy. He's not going to be protecting you. You're not going to be praying to him and stuff. You'll be separated from God, you know. Number three, you're going to lose your identity. You won't even know that you're God's people. You know, after a while, nobody ever remember that. Okay? But in the place that you settle down, eventually, after the scattering, all the people around you are going to call you sons of the living God. You won't know that you're Israelites, but they're going to call you the sons of the living God. Who in history, this is billions of people, okay, billions groups, billions of people, who in history are known as the sons of the living God. Not Islam. They're Allah. They're not the God of the Bible, they're Allah. The Christians, not the Buddhists, not the Shintos, well, I take back the Shintos because that's a different story we'll get to. Because the Israelites are in Japan too. The Northwest Europe, British Isles, and America. The traditional Christian nations of the world are known as the sons of the living God. Okay? And then we spent segments looking at the origins of the Celts, okay? Showing that they came from exactly the same place as the Bible says that the Israelites were taken to. Between and underneath the Caspian and the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, up in what today we call Armenia. Up there with Lake Van and all that. Here, real quick, okay? they got conquered down here in Jerusalem, and here's the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, okay, and they were put up underneath there, up into the Armenia, some of them down around over here, and some of them over here, and the biggest group of them went up through there and over to the west. We'll see that in a bit too. But that's all we know about in the Bible. That's why they're called the lost tribes. We have no idea where they went. We have a real good idea, and historical, we went through all these history books and stuff, historical data that names certain people that we don't hear about in our history. Okay? Some of the names of those people, the Qumri, Khumri, Qumri, Gemira, Jimra, Iskuza, Saka. And we don't know about them because those are the names that the Persians and the Assyrians gave to the Israelites. The names that we know the history of are the Scythians and the Celts and the Goths and the Burgundians and the Ostrogoths we know all those names because those are the names in English and Roman and Greek names that are translated out of these other names from Assyria and Persia. The tribes weren't lost, just the names got changed. But we don't hear about that, either in history or in church. Celts. And Behistun Rock. Remember Behistun Rock? And 23,000 tablets out of the Assyrian Royal Library that talk about those same people with using those names, but without doubt, connect all of those names, the Qumri and the Iskuza, with the Israelites. Because the inscriptions talk about these people coming from Cana, the land of Canaan, and they were the people who were conquered by mainly Darius the Mede in 550 BC or so forth. Okay, they're all Israelites. Names, and then the last two times we trace the tribe of Dan, as they came in two historical eras, okay, out of Egypt and out of Palestine. And they pioneered and settled all over Asia and the North Mediterranean, as I said, naming the rivers and establishing trade and posts and so forth. And also how the tribe, because of the way they named things, they fulfilled the prophecies, okay, given to them by Dan and Moses later on, okay. And if Dan, let's see, British Isles, North America, if Dan came out of Egypt over that 250 years that they ruled Egypt, well, many other ones came out too. And we'll get to some of those in detail later on, that weren't Danites. And yet, because Dan was first and went around, became the Argive Danites. Jason and the Argonauts we'll get to after a while. They're all Danite influences, major influence by the Dan, okay? So we left Dan in Greece after founding Argos and colonizing north and south through all of Greece as the Argive Dani. And today we'll go up into Scythia and see all the Danite influences of Scythia on over into Ireland and Scotland and the Black Sea, the North Sea, not the Black Sea, but the North Sea. Well, both actually. It's all around there. And we've got J.C. Gawler, his book again, called Dan, the Pioneer of Israel. Okay, this is a great little book. You really should get this book. I mean, you can get it through the Covenant people, or probably you might be able to get it through artisan publishers. Look that up on the internet, artisan publishers. Dan the Pioneer of Israel, you'll be able to find that. You might also be able to get it from a group called the Covenant People. They're part of the British Israel movement. As regards the history of the Scythians on the Black Sea, Herodotus, he went right up there and talked to him personally. Herodotus mentions a king Saulios, 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 living on the Dnapros, or the Dnieper River, both of them. He was the father of Idan Thyrsus, Thyrsus, the king who made an interruption against the Medes, and held Asis, A-S-I-S, and the Holy Land for 29 years, penetrating to Egypt. This took place about 630 BC. 630 BC, how does that fit in? Well, in 721, 100 years earlier, was when Assyria transported the last remnants of the house of Israel up into the area of Armenia, up in there, right? And from that position, in around 630 BC, which is somewhat before the Babylonian captivity of Judah, some of these guys got together and tried to take back the promised land, right? Some 80 or 90 years after the captivity, as I said, but nearly 600 years after Dan's first settlement in the Black Sea. See, because 1200 BC, they were up there by the Black Sea, okay? And it reads uncommonly like a wild dash of some of the tribes, an Israelite crusade to recover their inheritance. Never heard about that before, in history or the Bible? Herodotus also records that the Scythians, quote, studiously avoid the use of foreign customs. They don't do what the foreign people do. They're doing their own thing, mainly their own thing. And second ESDRAS, we'll get to that in a second, ascribes as a reason for the 10 tribes moving away from Media that they desired to serve God in their own way. Let's take a look at that. The Apocrypha. Apocrypha? Okay, the Apocrypha. In the Apocrypha, the whole thing used to be in the Catholic Bible. And then, under the influence of Satan, the English and British Bible Societies just took it out. Took it out. Well, God allowed that, so it accomplished something for him, see? So we can't blame them that much. But there's a lot of stuff in the Apocrypha that's really pertinent. Oh, sure, it wasn't written by apostles, all that stuff. But in the Apocrypha, there are 2 books called 1st and 2nd ESDRAS, E-S-D-R-A-S, ESDRAS, which is only the Greek name Ezra. Ezra, the 1st and 2nd Ezra in the Apocrypha. Well, you pick up your Apocrypha and parallel that 1st Ezra, 1st ESDRAS, with Ezra. See, there's only one Ezra in the Bible, but there's 2 books of Ezra. The second one isn't in the Bible. See? But this 1st Esdras reads almost verbatim what Ezra in the Bible says, so you know it's got to be true. But in 2nd Esdras, there's some really good stuff in here. And one of the things in chapter 13 and 12 and stuff is a prophecy of the end times, a big overbroad picture of the end times. and it tells Ezra sees Armageddon, and Christ comes with the saints and offs all the bad guys, but he also sees a huge number of, quote, peaceable people. And then the angel comes and he says, here's what that means. And he tells him what it means about the end times. But then in the interpretation down on verse 40, he says, and as for your seeing him gather about himself, that's the Messiah, another multitude that was peaceable, these are the 10 tribes. No fooling around there. These are the 10 tribes that in the days of King HOSEA, the king of the house of Israel, king of HOSEA, were carried away from their own land into captivity, whom Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, made captives and carried beyond the river. They were carried off unto another country. Boom. Well, we know about that from the Bible, don't we? But that's all we know. We know where they went: Hera, Habor, Hala, the river Gozan. You remember that. I just showed it to you a minute ago. Okay, we got the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea and Israel, right? And they're carried up into here. There's Haler and Haba, and the river Gozan is up in there, okay? Armenia, all of Armenia, and down some beside that, okay? But verse 41 tells the story. But they formed this plan among themselves to leave the heathen population and go to a more distant region where the human race had never lived, so that there, perhaps, they might keep their statutes, which they had not kept in their own country. Well, the implication being that they said, wow, we did it bad. Okay, God, we're going to do it your way from now on. And that goes along with not keeping the customs of the people where they lived. They kept to themselves. And we'll get to those customs a little bit later, some of them. And they went in to that place that they were going to go, okay? They went in by the narrow passages of the Euphrates River. Oh. Well, the narrow passages, that's the sources of the Euphrates River. Where is that? It's right up to the Caucasus Mountains, right? The Euphrates River comes out of the southern Caucasus Mountains, right? Right up above where they were put, okay? For the Most High then did wonders for them, and he held back the sources of the river until they passed over. Ooh. But it was a long journey of 1.5 years. Well, why was that? Well, because there were almost 5 million of them that were relocated out there by the Assyrians, okay? If 2 million of them were over to the south of the Caspian Sea and to the east of the Caspian Sea, and another 1 million were over under the Black Sea and to the west of the Black Sea, and 3 million went up through the pass, well, you look up the DARIAL Pass. You can look it up on Google Earth and see what it looks like. It's a narrow passage, and there were so many of them, it took them 1.5 years to get across the mountains. That's what he says. But it was a long journey of 1.5 years, and that country is called, see, it's all here. All the details are right here. Okay, that country is called Arzareth. Arzareth. Okay? And they lived there until the last time. Arzareth. Arzareth is right on the top. It's another word for Scythia, right? See, there it is. Arzareth. Scythia. All of this area above the Caucasus Mountains. Okay? Went up in there, stayed there for quite a while, and then made their way over into Northwest Europe and the Black Sea. And the Scythians were later known as Goths, right? As Goths. Some of the Cimmerians were called Goths too. And if you remember in earlier times, the Romans, because they had two big groups of people, all Israelites, Scythians and Sarmatians. Samaria, Sarmatians, okay, moved in the same place, up into Scythia. And they said, well, we can't keep these peace straight. I'll tell you what, we'll call these original Scythians, who were there first, we'll call them the genuine Scythians. And genuine in Roman is German. Germain, something is germane, it's genuine, German. So the Germans, they were called Germans too. Here we are. Scythians were known as Goth, or Gauthae, or Gauthae, okay? Probably, or possibly because the Gauthae, an important branch of the Scythian nation. Now the Gauthae were the Sarmatians, the Massagautae, right? The larger horde, the big mass of the Gauthae, or the Israelites. It came around the west, or the east side of the Caspian Sea, up over the top of the Caspian Sea, and then moved west and pushed against the original Scythians. They're cousins from other different tribes. Gauthae, an important branch of the Scythian nation, were most in contact with the Romans, with whom, therefore, all Scythians were Gothai. Salman, a Jewish writer in 1818, in Researches in the East, he quotes Ortelius, who, quote, notes the kingdom of Arsareth, where the 10 tribes retiring took the name Gauthae, G-A-U-T-H-E-I, Gauthae. They took that name, Gauthae. As apropos to the general subject, it may be observed in concluding this chapter that Ptolemy mentions a Scythian people sprung from the Sakai. Now that's spelled S-A-K-A-I, Sakai. Well, that comes, of course, from Isaac, Sakai, Sakai. And which we'll see in a much later segment. Sakai is one of the most common names, just like Jones, most common names in Japan. Several little groups of these Israelites traveled all the way to Japan and became the samurai from Samaria. We'll get to that. Came from the Sakai, named Saxones, S-A-X-O-N-E-S, and that's by Sharon Turner. And Moore, Pillar Stones of Scotland, observes this, that the Sakasuni, S-A-C-A-S-U-N-I, see, a lot of different spellings. The Sakasuni of Armenia, okay, were of the same stock as the Saxons of England, is deemed sufficiently evident by those who have most deeply studied the subject. They're all related, in other words, right? How about the Danes, the Dannans, the Dani? Right? The Danes are always spoken of as of the Gothic family. The Danes are also called Goths, okay? The Danes are Goths. Goths are big, right? I mean, if all the Scythians were called Goths, all the different little groups of the tribes themselves, like the Burgundians and the Ostrogoths, okay? All of them were all called Goths, okay? And part of that was the tribe of Dan were called Goths also, because they are all in the same region up there. Okay? Again, smaller groups of Dan were everywhere. Okay? The whole tribe of Dan wasn't doing all of these different things. Gotcha. Spoken of a Gothic family, right? Though seemingly more specifically, specially given to the sea than other Gothic tribes. Okay? The reputed common ancestor, leader, or deity of the Goths, Saxons, and Danes was one Odin. Odin, we've heard of Odin, yeah. All those guys up in Scandinavia, they worship Odin, you know, the god of, throws his thunder down, Thor, and okay. The Danes also claim as an ancestor or a leader a renowned warrior named Dan. Dan. And hence their country was called Dan, and he's got it spelled D-A-N-N-E dash M-E-R-K. Denmark. Dan's land, or Dan's mark. Denmark is Dan, founded by Dan, okay? The settlements of the Dannans, or Danes, in Denmark and Norway seem to have been made in very remote times, for the Irish colony of the Dannans, that we'll get to real quick, are said to have visited Denmark first. First, they went out the Straits of Gibraltar and up into Scandinavia. Well, they had already gone and scouted out all those rivers that went up north into that area, didn't they? Well, what is that here? We get oriented here, the Black Sea, okay, and here's the North Sea. Well, from the Black Sea, look at these rivers. They all travel up this way, okay? And so they had this all scouted out a long time ago. And when they came out of the Straits of Gibraltar and went up, they went up into their old places where they knew already, right? And I mentioned in one of the other segments, PBS had a really neat documentary on the Vikings. The Vikings, and they were going to establish a trade route from the North Sea over land, down through the Crimea and all that area, down into the Holy Land by land. On the way, they stopped and did their usual thing, and eventually they just took over Kiev, because they were the traders with all the goods and the knowledge and all that stuff. As we'll see, Danites were big guys. And in the documentary, they said that probably these Danites, these Vikings, they didn't know they were Danites, these Vikings essentially came to rule Kiev and probably were the stock that spawned all of the white Russian royalty. Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. I mean, they were the traders. Every place they stopped, these Aborigines thought they were magicians. They had all the highest technology. They sailed across the ocean. They knew longitude and latitude and all that stuff. They knew all that stuff. Where were we? More traces for the same south and Odin. Oh yeah, Odin. Okay. Here we go. They visited Denmark first, and to have found their compatriots and namesakes there before them. They knew they were there, okay? In some strength, with considerable towns. It is characteristic of these early Dannans that wherever we read of them, we hear of their establishing schools. Whoa, establishing schools. And being regarded, of course, for their superior knowledge, as magicians by the simpler aborigines of the countries to which they came. Odin is an historical and mythical personage. He's a real guy. In fact, he was many real guys, as you'll see. Okay, it was a name also often assumed by Danish chieftains. In Norse, it's Ottin, O-T-T-I-N. In Gothic, Wotan, W-U-O-T-A-N. The Lombards wrote Wodan. The Old Saxons, Wodan. Westphalian Saxons, Godan, G-O-D-A-N, or Gudan. You notice all these Dans in here? It's always about Dan. Okay, Gudan. Here's more from Pillar Stones. Odin's capital, Asgard, a real place, as you'll see, was supposed to be between the Euxine, that's the Black Sea, the Euxine and Caspian Seas. Well, what area is between the Black and the Caspian Seas? Above the Caucasus Mountains is not between those seas. It's above both of them. The only place between those two seas is below the Caucasus Mountains. Right? The Chronicle of the Swedish kings commences with an account of a people of the east of the river Tanakis. Now, the Tanakis is the Danastrom, or the Danastrom, or Dnieper, or Danube. Okay? The people were governed by a pontiff king, Odin. This is in Asgard, between the Caspian and Black Sea, down below the Caucasus Mountains. They're governed by a pontiff king, Odin. These people introduced the worship of Odin into Denmark and Sweden. Traces of, that's a French word title of the book. I don't know what that says. South of the sources, the narrow passages of the Euphrates may be found, he's quoting second ESDRAS here. The best of the modern maps excuse me. The district or province Asgird, A-S-G-E-R-D, with the capital of the same name, corresponding as well as can fairly be conceived as with Asgard, the traditional home and palace of Odin, near the Euxine and the Caspian Seas. Okay? Again, we've got the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and between them is Asgard. Can you see Asgard in there? Can you see the name Asgard? I hope you can. It's there. It's right there. Right there. I can see it. The position of Asgard in a Prussian map which I possess, that's Gawler. He's the keeper of the crown jewels. He's not some backyard historian. Is about 30 miles north of Lake Van. I showed you Lake Van. It's right up in there below the Caucasus Mountains. It's fed by the Caucasus Mountains, right? The old Irish manuscripts, many of which I believe are still untranslated, seem to possess a vast amount of information regarding the Dannans, D-A-N-N-A-N-S, the Dannans, or Tuatha, or Tuath D, or Dai, Dannan, tribe of Dannan. Okay? At present, Keating's History of Ireland and Annals of Ireland by the Four Masters are, I believe, the best works. In these histories compiled from ancient records, the Dannans and Milesians, said to be the same race, are represented as arriving in various batches from Greece. From, quote, Gothland in the Euxine. Gothland in the Euxine. We know about Gothlands. And from Scythia, near the Euxine and Caspian Seas, and early Phoenician and Egyptian affinities are likewise noticed. Thus, they confirm much of the information regarding the various colonies founded by the Dani, Argive Dani, Jason and the Argonauts, we'll get to them, which have been traced out through many historians in this paper. The Dannans and the Milesians were all Israelites, in other words. They were the same race. They don't say Israelites, but they were the same race, and we know that they're Israelites. Keating's history of states that there were two peoples who arrived in Ireland, the Dannans and the Milesians, of whom the Dannans arrived first. At page 40 he says, the Dannans were a people of great learning, establishing schools. They had overmuch gold and silver, rich traders. They left Greece after a battle with the Assyrians, and for the fear of falling into the hands of the Assyrians, came to Norway and Denmark, and thence passed over to Ireland. They went up to where they knew their brothers were already. Brothers, not cousins, but brothers. Because, wait a second. Here it says, in the Annals of the Four Masters, the colony called Tuatha de Danann conquered the Firbolgs. Dannans got there first, and then the Milesians, but when the Dannans got there to Ireland, they conquered the Firbolgs, and became masters of Ireland. It appears that the Dannans were highly civilized people, far more skilled in the arts and sciences than that of the colonies settled in Ireland. They ruled Ireland for 2 centuries before the Milesians got there. 2 centuries. So they got there about 1200 BC. 197 years, according to the Psalter of Cashel, and were highly skilled in architecture and other arts from a long residence in Greece and intercourse with the Phoenicians. Well, they were the Phoenicians, remember? But what I have to tell you here is that the Firbolgs weren't the first people there. The Fomorians are recorded in Irish history as being there first. The Fomorians were there, and where did they come from? Greece. Greece. Firbolgs came from Greece. They're all cousins, okay? They're all cousins of the Dannans. They're all Israelites. And as the history shows, the Milesians are also Israelites, and so are cousins of the Firbolgs. The date of the arrival of the first colony of the Dannans would be around 1200 BC, or about 85 years after Deborah and Barak's victory, when we are told that Dan had ships. Remember that? We did that in one of the last 2 segments. They had a war, and they were pointing the finger at Dan and another tribe for not contributing to the war. They won anyway, but they said, well, because Dan was in ships. Keating observes at page 30 that the Milesians were the same race as the Dannans, for when the son of Brogand arrived, Brogand, the son of Brogand. See, in Spain, the Milesians made 5 different settlements. 5 brothers came from Miletus across the Mediterranean to Spain and founded 5 different settlements. And then 3 of them eventually went to Ireland and conquered the Dannans. Okay? But Brogan is the father of these 5 Milesian sons. Okay? When the son of Brogan arrived, the people conversed in the same language. The Dannans and the Milesians talked. Okay? What this language was is proved by the words of the Phoenician or Carthaginian slave in the Polonulus of Plautus, being nearly pure Irish, as spoken only the last century. It is shown in the pamphlet printed in Dublin in 1772, quote, Essay on the Antiquity of the Irish Language, end quote. The Phoenician language was identical with the Hebrew. Why? Because the Phoenicians were Israelites, right? They spoke the old, even their cousins from Tyre spoke a close form of Hebrew, okay? The Milesians, observe Keating, are sometimes called Gadalians. Gadalians, from a leader Gadhal, Gadhol. And in Hebrew, Gadhal means great. Great leader. And he states, Keating, the most ancient Irish chronicles assert that the Gadalians in general were called Scots. What? Scots? How did they get that name, Scot? Because they came out of Scythia, actually Scythia. Scots from Scythia, Scythia from the Scythians, Scythian from Iscusa, Iscusa from Scouthae or Sukkoth, the observance of the Feast of Sukkoth, and the town in Egypt, Sukkoth, where the Israelites lived. It goes all the way back to Sukkoth. It transfers all the way up through those languages to Scythian, and then Scythian goes in English to Scot. Isn't that fascinating? Scot. Because they came out of Scythia. And, page 76, he says, Irish records of great antiquity assert that the Gadalians continued in Gothland in the Euxine 150 years. Well, wait a minute. Let me finish that first. 150 years after leaving their country and before going via Spain to Ireland. These Milesians, well, wait a minute. They lived in Gothland of the Euxine? Well, we've heard of Gothland, haven't we? Gothland is up here in the North Sea, right? Right? Black Sea down here, up into the North Sea. Well, there it says right there, Goths. Goths were in that area. And we have Gothland Island. This is all Gothland up here. Well, wait a minute. Gothland, he didn't say it was there. He said it's down here, in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. You see that? Gothland is down in here. Is that on this map? I don't think it's on this map. No, it's not. But the historian says between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea was Gothland, where the Goths came from. You know. I lost my place. Wait a minute. Scots, there we are. There we are. Annals of the Island of the Four Masters. The Milesians, according to our old annalists, were originally a colony from Scythia, okay, near to the Euxine and Caspian Seas on the borders of Europe and Asia, and about the country now called the Crimea. We know the Crimea, don't we? Huh? From these people, called also Scotai or Scots, Ireland got the name of Scotia. Well, they got Scotia from the Scots, and the old name for Ireland is Hibernia. Hebreia is what it is, Hibernia. As same as the Milesians in Spain, okay? Spain, the old name of Spain is Ibernia. Not Hibernia, but Ibernia. Ebru, Iberia. Boy, it's just all over the place, isn't it? Okay? Villanova's Phoenician Ireland, translated by H. O'Brien, page 184, has the following curious remark accounting for the name Dannan when endeavoring to prove them Phoenician. Okay? I recollect, quote, I recollect the Phoenician language is to be found the word Danahain, D-A-N-I-H-A-I-N, Danahain, signifying illustrious, generous, noble, or rather Danner for Dannani, or Danita, the inhabitants of the city of Dan at the foot of Mount Lebanus, the spot where the Phoenicians worshipped the graven image given to them by Micah, and where Jeroboam erected a golden calf. Wow, look at that. He wants the Danites to be Phoenicians because they were up there in the city of Dan. Oh, I haven't got anything like that I can show you, is it? No, I can't. The city of Dan, up there at the top of Israel. Remember when they went up there with 600 soldiers, the number for war, conquered Laish, named the city Dan, took over and made that part of their territory. All right? You find that in Judges. All right? It would be endless to attempt to relate all that is said in the Irish records about the Dannans and that mark of Phoenicia and Israel, Baal worship. The Psalter of Cashel says that the Tower of Tara was built for the preservation of the fire of Baal and was called Belthein, T-H-E-I-N-E, Thein. The early connection with Greece, Phoenicia, and Egypt is constantly alluded to throughout the chronicles and records of the Irish Dannans. And Scotland, well, if the Dannans were called Scots from Scotia, where did Scotland get its name? Because further migrations from Ireland up into Scotland area happened by those same people. More migrations. And when they got up there, they called them Scots. So it was Scotland. Scotland. You're from Scotland? I am. Large bodies of Annans, no D there, A-N-N-A-N-S, crossed over to Scotland, both from Europe and from Ireland, in very early times. Here also we find numerous traces of Baal worship and Belthein, as well as Buddhism. The pillar stones generally bear a serpent. Dan's mark, right? Dan's serpent, his... Okay. More Dan. How about Dan in the Black Sea? Dan in the Black Sea. it was as nearly as chronologists can determine, about 1280 BC when Jason and the Argonauts, Jason's expedition, composed of the flower of Thessaly, sailed in the Argonauts, from the port of Iolcus, Iolchous. The Scythians are Heraclidae. Now remember last time, the Heraclidae said that Heracles was their father, their big-time guy, but the word Heracles means traitor. Traitor. Their main guy was a traitor. The Heraclidaeans were traitors, okay? And we also found that Heracles was a super guy, okay? Super guy. The only super guy that I know out of the tribe, these are all Danites, the only super guy I know out of the Bible that comes from the tribe of Dan is a guy named Samson. Strongest man in the world. That's where Hercules comes from, because Hercules is only a form of Heracles. Heracles. Whew. Good little review there, okay? Now Thessaly, Strabo tells us, was colonized by Phoenicians, so-called. He also tells us that it was Argive, Phoenician Argive. Hence, we come around again to the Dani. There is an additional tallying proof also of there being genuine Dani, for many years afterwards a shipload of the descendants of the Argonauts found their way back to Greece and claimed relationship with the Lacedaemonians. Remember them from last time? Lacedaemonians, who called their fathers, who they called their fathers. They went back over there and said, oh, you guys are our progenitors, our grandfathers. Right? And the claim was admitted. And remember, the Lacedaemonians are just Israelites, heavy Danite influence, and one of their princes was going to get into the Olympic Games over in Greece, and they said, you can't come over here, you're not one of us, you're not a Danite. Whoa, sure we are. Our fathers go back to back. I said, oh, I guess you are, you can play. Herodotus mentions the important fact that in his time, now he went and talked to the Scythians personally, face to face. Right? In his time, 420 BC, the Colchians observed circumcision. Colchians, wow. He adds, I found that the Colchians had more recollection of the Egyptians than the Egyptians had of the Colchians. End quote. Israel indeed would retain a very lively recollection of the Egyptians. They lived there for 400 years. He also says the Colchians alone and the Egyptians manufacture linen in the same manner. And I'll offer that the Egyptians found out how to manufacture that linen from the Colchians, the Israelites. Okay, Israelites. Manufacture linen of the same manner, and the whole way of living and language is similar to both nations. But the Colchians' linen is called by the Greek sardonic, though that which comes from Egypt is called Egyptian. Strabo says, traces of Jason's expedition still remain, and the Jassonica, or towns of Jason. Jason was a Danite. The Argonauts were Danites, Phoenicians. They sailed all around and they made up these trips up the rivers and established all these places, all these towns named after Jason and the Danites. Okay? Towns of Jason are everywhere met with in Armenia, underneath the Caucasus Mountains, between the two seas. Media, under the Caspian Sea, and the same place, and the surrounding countries. The Median helmet, we are told by several writers, was serpent-crested. Dan, serpent, on and on. Might this not have been introduced among the race by the Danite colonists? 500 years before Israel's captivity, Israel, the house of Israel, okay, in 721, okay, 500 years before that, 1200, God, who foresaw Israel's sin and necessary punishment, was still providing for Israel's safety and comfort by having the country to which, as wretched, degraded captives they would eventually be brought, pioneered and opened up for them and settled by batches of their more adventurous brethren, the Danites. And secondly, that while Babylon, as a scourge against Judah, using Babylon as a scourge against Judah, God was using Babylon, who had gone after Babylonian gods, God was secretly fostering in the mountains of Media, north of Babylon, a rod of his own sanctified ones, quote, quote, an offshoot of Israel, wherewith to destroy Babylon for her cruelty towards the people. You get that part? Israel is taken away and they're put up in Armenia, but God, who allowed Babylon to take Judah away, got a little group of guys together here to beat up on Babylon and let them people go back. And this is really something, okay? They dug up what they say are gates of Jerusalem from the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. And in those gates, wooden gates, they found these very unique arrow points. And they look like a little pyramid, a three-pointed pyramid. They're not flat, you know, and pointed and flat. They're three-sided. The only people in history that we know of that uses those points are the Scythians. Scythians. Where'd they get it? They always had it because they're Israelites. Israelites, as mercenaries, came down and helped Cyrus beat the Babylonians. Right? And they also, because the Babylonians conquered Israel, right, Judah, Jerusalem, they also helped as mercenaries Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon to beat up on Judah. See, so God takes these Israelites, takes them up into Armenia, takes a small group of them, helps them to go down to Babylon and beat up on Jerusalem so that they can be punished for their 70 years. They go over to Babylon, and 70 years comes up, and another group of mercenaries teams up with Cyrus, beats up on Babylon, and lets the people go back to Jerusalem to fulfill the prophecy of Jeremiah, 70 years. Because they had to rebuild the temple so that Jesus could come. Wonderful stuff. Well, wonderful stuff. Let me read the last part of it. These, quote, sanctified ones in Media may give us a clue to the ancestry of that remarkable man, Cyrus, whom God calls mine anointed. Oh, follow that implication. Cyrus was an Israelite? He was anointed by God? Well, Isaiah prophesied before he was born that he was going to come and let the people go, and that his name would be Cyrus. Is Cyrus a heathen, non-Israelite? Or is he an Israelite? I find in Ezra 13:17 that on the return of the 70 weeks of Babylonian captivity, having no Levites, Ezra had to send to Edo, the chief of the place Scythia, right? That they should bring unto us ministers for the house of God. End quote. And in Dr. Henderson's Russian researches, Scythia is identified as a district bordering on the Caspian Sea, right where the Israelites were, right? In the times of, how is it that Ezra didn't have any Israelites to work the temple? 650 people left Judah and were carried away to Babylon. Did all of the Levites that were there stay? Did they stay? Oh, wait a minute. Judah got carried away for the same reason that Israel got carried away. They weren't following God's law, right? They were worshiping all these other idols, Babylonian gods, like we just said. God says, oh, you don't do that. I want to punish you. Huh? Well, I lost my place. Well, I just want to review that whole thing again, right? They worshiped idols, so they took them away. Well, who's in charge of the worship of a country, of that country? High priest, right? High priest? Oh, wait a minute. The high priest is out of the Levi. Well, did the high priesthood and the Levites corrupt God's worship so badly? Well, evidently they did, because if they were doing it the right way, the whole country wouldn't get taken away. Huh? They must have been corrupt also. So you got 650,000 people go across over there, and the Levites and the priesthood, they stay. Because when Cyrus comes into power and they let the people go back in, only 50,000 of them go back. 600,000 people stay. And evidently, because Ezra has to call up to Armenia to get some priests out of the Levites, who must have been carried away with the Israelites. It must have been because the Levites over in Babylon didn't come back. Huh? Oh. Sad situation over there. Okay? In the times of the apostles, it was recognized that the members of the 10 tribes, did I miss anything here? Members of the 10 tribes were in Asia Minor. For St. Peter, remember this part, first epistle is addressed not to the strangers scattered, that's what the King James says, but when you look it up in the original language, you find that it says, to the elect strangers, see, in the sense of strangers and pilgrims, right? Of the dispersion. The dispersion. Okay? The dispersion being the word used by the Jews, denoting the 10 tribes. Who are the 10 tribes? They're the dispersion. Yeah, and they went up there in Armenia and the Caspian and the Black Sea and so forth. And yeah. Peter knew where the lost tribes were. right? He knew where they were. Look up the original language. Get your Strongs out. Okay? Josephus states that when Ezra received permission to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, quote, he sent a copy of the epistle to all his own nation that were in Media. Same thing, again, we just read that. And he adds, but then the entire body of the people of Israel remained in that country. Wherefore there are but 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes, that would be Judah and Babylon, and Benjamin, who came back from Babylon. Benjamin and Judah were subject to Europe, Rome, okay, Josephus is writing in the 1st century. Rome controls the Holy Land. They control Benjamin and Judah, right? 2 tribes. Wait a minute, I got the wrong paragraph here. The entire body remaining in the country, wherefore only 2 tribes in Asia and Europe be subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes are beyond Euphrates, way up north, until now, and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated by numbers. Of the region of Colchis, that's the end of Josephus, Dr. Clark mentions the vast number of tumuli. Oh, tumuli. Well, waymarkers, tombs as waymarkers. Tumuli, which he thinks must be placed as marks for guidance across the immense plains. And they continue on to the Sea of Azov. Azov, that's on the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, right? Quote, reminding us of the prophet's warning to exiled Israel. Set thee up waymarks. Set thee up waymarks. I have observed the same on the Danube, where tumuli is stretched from Widden in the southeast direction, apparently towards the Gulf of Burgas. A few are visible on the north bank, stretching to the northwest. The Russian Archaeological Society opened one of these tumuli near Potai, P-O-T-I. Within was a large arched vault, beautifully constructed of white limestone, in which, this wasn't just some little simple tomb, okay? They didn't just bury somebody and put a bunch of rocks on top. Constructed of white limestone, where do they get that stuff? Okay? In which was found a gold serpent, type of Dan, with ruby eyes. Now the Bene Israel of India, Bene means sons, right? Sons of Israel, the Bene Israel of India secretly worship a serpent of this sort. But mostly it's silver. Now, Dr. Scott used to teach that well, Israelites, why would they worship a certain serpent? It's Satan, right? Serpent to Satan. Well, if I'm right about this and remember it right, he says that they worship the serpent to keep him appeased so they wouldn't hurt him, right? So I assume that they worship God also. But they had this special worship for the serpent to keep him at bay. The rock temples of India. Well, where is India? That's way east of the Caspian Sea. A lot of groups migrated east, and some of them, as I said, all the way to Japan. Rock temples of India give us some additional testimony regarding the existence in the region about the Black Sea of the Danites and other tribes of Israel. Hebraic inscription upon the walls of a rock temple in Kanari, 20 miles north of Bombay, says this: Lo, the worship of Saka, S-A-K-A, the worship of Saka is the fruit of my lip. His garden, which Cyrus laid low, was glowing red. Behold, it is blackened. His people, being aroused, would have their rights, for they were cast down at the city of the parting of Dan. Tribe of Dan. I mean, this is in India. Okay, they're talking about Dan and Cyrus, and who being delivered was perfectly free. Dan was perfectly free. Everyone grew mighty, and Saka's mouth, enkindling them, brought the princes together of the race of Harari, and you find that name in 2 Samuel, okay? And they're from the hill country of Ephraim. As to Dan, this is in the inscription. As to Dan, his unloosing was destruction, oppression, and strife. He stoutly turned away, departed twice. The predetermined thought is a hand prepared. Yea, Gauthae, there's those Goths again. Gauthae, in other words, the opposite or north coast of the Black Sea, called Gothland. Okay. The inscription is talking about the Black Sea, Gothland, that watched for the presence of Dan, afforded concealment to the exile. The redeemed of Kasha wandered about like a flock overdriven. That's the end of this. That's a long inscription. In India. What is it, 30 miles north of Bombay? 20 miles. Tribe of Dan. Wow, what a study, you know? And there's more about Dan in Ireland. We're doing in the segments to come. You never get rid of Dan, because the whole study of the lost tribes depends on him going there first and establishing places. And all the names are there and everything. And don't forget the sons of Zara in Egypt, okay? They're ruling after Joseph dies, okay? And what about all the strange parallels to the tribe of Zebulun and Holland, the Netherlands? Wow, we'll get into some of that in detail. Again, here's the close. The usual close is what? Why do we do all this? Why do we do this lost tribes, tribe of Dan, all that? We prove that the Bible is true. All those prophecies, like some 300 different prophecies to the house of Israel, never mind Judah, they've got some of their own, come true. Some of them, some of the things that God tells those Israelites at Mount Sinai, right around Mount Sinai, they haven't gone to the promised land yet. He says, do all this stuff and I'll bless you. If you don't, I'll curse you and punish you for 7 times. And when you do the math, which I think we'll do a little bit later, 7 times is 2,520 years. In 2,520 years, we see the exact freeing up of the birthright of those Israelites. You go through some of the promises of the Israelites, okay, of the birthright, just the birthright. And you see that the Israelites, the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes, Ephraim at the head, Ephraim didn't get the birthright. Jacob said he got the birthright, but he never got it. The Assyrians came and conquered them and took them all away. Never got the birthright. Well, but Ephraim became England, Britain, and Britain all of a sudden exploded onto the world scene as an empire in the 1800s, 2,520 years after Samaria falls. The Bible is true. The Bible is true. And if the Bible is true, so is God, right? God is real. He's real. And if he's real, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that you can't prove, not like with a history book. But God says, I'll do this. You do that, I'll do this. Well, if God is real, and the Bible is the inspired Word of God, every place you look, maybe the places where you look that you can't find out and prove for sure are also inspired. And if God's real, he'll keep his word to you. And that word is, act in trust of me, regardless of the negative circumstances that you see, and I'll put some of my spirit inside your body. And when that spirit's inside your body, you look just like Jesus to me. That's what saving is. It's not believing on God or believing on Jesus or accepting the resurrection. It's acting in faith. All that other stuff is from the neck up. See? It doesn't intrude in your physical life. I've come to the conclusion that if you're not spending 25% of your whole life, time, energy, money, directed at God, 25% of your life, if you're not giving that to God, you're falling short. You're falling short. I'm not saying you're not saved. You know, you might be getting some faithing in there. But God didn't call you to be saved. He called you to work for him. See? He called Jesus to work for him. Not for us. Jesus didn't go to the cross to save us. He didn't do that. He went there to please God. And there's a whole big long story behind that. Because he didn't have to be crucified. You look at the two prayers in the garden and the prayer, the long prayer at the Last Supper. In both places, adequate witness, both places, he says, I did everything you told me to do. He didn't leave out anything. Everything God told Jesus to do, he did. He didn't tell him to be crucified. He said, in effect, this is what I need. You can do it if you want. You don't have to. But I do need this. And Jesus said, I did everything you told me to do. And if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to be crucified. But your will, not mine. And if that's what you say you need, I'll do it. I'll do it. But because of his obedience, the whole of salvation is opened up to us. Well, Lost Tribes, number 15. Going along, okay? Only 8 or 9 more to go. Maybe more than that, who knows? Thanks a lot for watching, okay? God bless.